I'm welcoming Jennifer Williams to the Cash Rich Exit podcast. And in segment one of our three-part series here, we're going to talk about employee ownership trusts, employee ownership plans, and a focus today on, what inspired you to get into this world and how how can this structure preserve business values? So.
Hmm.
Ready to dive in today, Jennifer?
Sure am. Thanks for
Ec-
having me.
Excellent. So, what inspired you to specialize in this area?
Yeah, so I actually came to business kind of quite accidentally. I started my career in the not-for-profit sector because I actually wasn't convinced that businesses had people at their heart, and I'm really a people person. I really believe in taking care of people. And I came to business accidentally because I was working in nonprofits and I was helping. I worked in microcredit in West Africa, and I worked in business development for women in Ottawa. Um, and what I started to see was that there were different ways to do business, and that there were ways that could be extractive, and that there were also ways that could be inclusive and kind and caring. And so upon my return from West Africa, came back to Canada and I started working in a worker-owned business that was focused on fair trade and organic cocoa, sugar, and chocolate. And for 10 years, I worked and led in that company in all kinds of different ways, and really started to understand the potential that employee ownership had in changing the way we do business. And I really believe firmly that when you change who owns the business, you change not only how people show up in their work and the commitment that they bring and the attitude that they bring, but you also change how they show up in their community and in the work that they do. And so for me, it was really about finding ways to um, be in business, to have an impact, to be inclusive, and to then continue those values on in my work.
Yeah. And as this compares to other models of employee succession, what would you say? Is there anything that you've seen that is comparable in terms of being able to preserve culture?
Mm. So one of the so in Canada right now, we have the largest generation of entrepreneurs in Canadian history. The baby boom generation has been phenomenally successful at building businesses. Those business owners are looking to retire. The number one place that is looking to buy businesses is private equity. So
Hmm.
private equity typically buys a business and they buy the business to extract the most amount of value in the least amount of time to make money. That's what they're doing.
Hmm.
And I can't tell you the number of times I get calls from business owners who say, I want to sell my business and I don't want to sell to private equity because I've been part of a business that once it was sold to private equity, it was dismantled and everyone lost their jobs. And the company was no longer in this small community. And so, and we've seen that through history in Canada, that private equity acquisitions lead to companies typically no longer existing in the future. Now, that's not always the case, but
Hmm.
if you've spent 20, 30, 40 years of your life building a business and you're looking to exit, most of the time it's not just the dollars that you're concerned about having in your pocket. And your podcast is all about a cash rich exit. So we definitely want business owners to
Oh
have money in
yeah.
their pocket, right? Like
But
it's not
it is more than just, it's really the cash rich exit, then it does go to the legacy, right? The
okay.
legacy is more than just the dollars and cents.
Exactly. So if you compare if you look at a business owner and their options, so selling to a competitor is always an option, and there's lots of good reasons to do that. So
Mhm.
that's an option. Do you preserve the business and the brand that you've built up? Do your employees keep their jobs? Do you stay local in your community? Those are questions you have to ask yourself.
Mhm.
But for me, I think the biggest threat in the Canadian economy is really the threat that private equity acquires all of these smaller, medium-sized Canadian companies, and we lose that economic fabric in our society that is so much of what drives our economy. And so
Mhm.
from my perspective, looking at employee ownership as an alternative to that, it really solidifies those businesses in those communities with those employees and protects the economy for future generations.
Yeah. So the only other potentially similar scenario would be like a family succession that
Right.
might keep the culture. Might.
Yeah, it could, well, and so it's what's really interesting with family succession, and we're doing quite a bit of work in this space as well. Family successions are notorious for not succeeding very well, right?
Mhm.
Second generation, not so bad. Third generation, really not great.
Mhm.
And what's interesting typically is that in those family business transitions, you usually, if you've been quite successful in growing the business, you usually have a core team of employees who are actually really more pivotal in the running of the business than maybe that next generation of family members are. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're talking to businesses that are looking at doing a generational transfer and saying, hey, how do we build employee ownership into that to give your business the stability of knowing that it's not only going to the next generation, but it's also being supported by the employees who've been here during the 20 years that you've been building this business. And so I think there are interesting ways to combine those two together.
I've been thinking about that specifically. There's a very specific client that I have in mind that I am I'm just trying to wrap my head around the best way to bring this idea forward. Because frankly, this client, my relationship is with the spouse of the owner of the family business,
Mhm.
actually. So,
Mhm.
as I'm getting to understand how this all works, I saw that as, potential, but breaking into that conversation. Maybe we can have an
Yeah.
offside, an
Sure.
offline, off
Yeah.
camera conversation
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Absolutely.
Um, do you have what examples might you be able to share of founders who have successfully transitioned to an employee ownership structure?
Yeah. So there are many. I'm going to talk about one of the things that we're seeing most common is kind of a phased approach. So where someone will start out by saying, okay, down the road, what I want to do is I want to transition this business to my employees. I'm going to start by launching an employee share ownership plan where I'm going to sell some 20% of my company, 30% of my company to my employees. I'm going to give them a sense of what that feels like and how it feels. Once they've done that, and then they're looking at the exit, what I've had companies do is they then say, okay, I'm now this balance of the company, this 70%. What I want to do is transition the rest of that to my employees. And so working with my clients, we figure out what's the management team going to look like? What is the governance structure going to look like? Who's going to be on the board of directors? If you're doing an employee ownership trust, who's going to be on the board of trustees? How are we financing that transition of a sale? And so in this particular case, this client is selling the balance of the company to a combination of an employee ownership trust and a management buyout.
Hmm.
And so in doing so, they're getting the tax benefits of the employee ownership trust, which I know we'll talk about. Um,
Hmm.
but they're also getting the knowledge that their management team is invested and is staying put and is going to be there to run the business moving forward.
Yeah, and I think that plays into like the next question I had, which is around sort of the emotional challenges of a business owner. I mean, I've that's come up multiple times in different conversations here on the podcast, but um, you know, how does the model help with that, or
Mhm.
how have you seen it help, or how do you expect that it will help the business owner in that?
It is so there's two I think there's two pieces to the emotional challenge for business owners. The first is to um, let go of the identity that comes with being your business,
Mm.
right? Those of us who own businesses, our identity is so closely tied to our business that the idea that it's no longer tied to our business is really difficult. And I myself, when I left the employee-owned company that I was with for 10 years and had been growing that business, was the CEO of that company. My identity was entirely tied to that. And I basically had to experience like a death of identity
Mhm.
around that to be able to move forward. So I'd say that's one of the challenges, right? When you've built your whole life or this part of your career around that, there's an identity piece. And so, we'll work with business owners to talk about coaching and support to get through that because that's definitely a real
Mhm.
challenge. The second is letting your employees step up and make mistakes. And oftentimes, um, some business owners are better at this than others, but it is difficult to let go and to like stand back and watch people make mistakes and be like, no, no, we like that, you shouldn't do that. Um, because the truth is, they kind of have to, like, some things are going to be done differently than you would do it.
Mhm.
And there are going to be some mistakes that are made. And that's part of the learning curve that will allow that next generation of leaders to lead the company moving forward. And so those are the two things that we see. And basically throughout our process, because the process is on average between 6 months and 2 years, there's regular coaching and support and guidance and built into our process so that we're supporting business owners in that transition.
Right. Well, that's certainly a big one, right? Because control is a lot of the times why, business is created is because I don't want to be controlled
Right.
by others. I want to be making the decisions and at the helm, right? Yeah. If from your perspective, do you think there are specific company profiles or industries that would fit this model better than others? And if so, what would they be?
Hmm. So what we most commonly see are that any industries where your employees are what you are selling. So if you're in construction, architecture, engineering, consulting, where basically your people are what is doing the work that is getting you your sales and your results, those industries are first and foremost what we see being lending themselves really well to employee ownership because what you ultimately need to keep those people to make sure that you can keep doing what you're doing. Um, that said, I've worked with companies in all different sectors, from manufacturing to engineering to construction to
Mm,
like across the board.
mhm.
So it's not that one precludes the other, but definitely where human um, labor is kind of your key selling what you're selling, then that it lends itself nicely.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I would have thought too, sort of where the product is the service.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. Um, Governance structures. Interesting. Recently, I've interviewed Jennifer Mondu of Mondu Rollins, who's got a program for private governance in Canada and trying to have more awareness and share success stories around that in terms of, from my perspective, is like where you have good governance around the value of the company.
Mm.
But, let's talk about governance in terms of um, employee-owned businesses and
Mhm.
how that could also help play into the values and founder's legacy. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I would say that one of the main reasons that people avoid the idea of employee ownership is because they think that if they're employees or owners, that everyone gets to decide everything all the time, right?
Hmm.
And that is not the case. So let's do like
It's
if
not
you're
anarchy.
it's not anarchy. This is so one of the things that we do is we work with companies to establish who makes what decisions when. And we will work with them to develop a governance matrix so that it's perfectly clear. Everyone knows who and when do people have the opportunity to have a say on something. So if you're a shareholder, you get an invitation to the annual general meeting
Hmm.
and you can vote on the matters that shareholders all get to vote on. That doesn't mean that you get to tell the CEO what to do just because you want to, right? And we also explain to people in our process in our education that when people are owners, we do expect them to think differently about their work. And so we want that, right? We want people having that lens of like, oh, if we did this differently, we could probably get better results. And so we do want people to do that, but the channel that they need to understand what the channels are to do that. And so the channel to do that would be their usual manager or supervisor or their
Mhm.
usual team that they're working with. However, they would normally raise those things, they would still raise them whether they're an owner or not. And so that's part of our process is really delineating the board of directors versus the shareholders versus the management and making it clear who does what.
Right. So speaking of process, there is a process that you take founders through when you're looking at putting this type of structure in place. Super high level, because I'm sure you could get really into the project management, minutia of the details, but high level, what does that process look like?
Yeah, so the first step of our process is really testing to see that employee ownership is the right thing for you and what kind of employee ownership could be right for you. So we want to make sure that you have employees that would be interested in being owners. We want to make sure that you have a business that has value worth transitioning. So we and what we do is I kind of describe it as like putting the puzzle pieces together. Is that like
Mhm.
your business, your culture, what you're trying to achieve, every business is different. And so we take all those different pieces and we come back to you and say, okay, given all these different puzzle pieces, here's what we think would be the right option for you. And if we don't think employee ownership is the right option for you, then we will let you know and we can introduce you to partners that we know that do mergers and acquisitions and other things. But that would be the first step. A suitability analysis. Does this make sense for you?
Mhm.
If it does make sense and you want to move forward, then we work with you to design, to implement, to do the education, the training, the support, the coaching, the leadership transition. All of those pieces are in our second stage of our process. And so that process can take, as I had mentioned, right? So the stage one is quite, it can be quite short. The suitability, typically 4 to 6 weeks. But that second step of the design, it's a change management project as well. So
Mhm.
that all can, is more of a 6 month to 18-month process where we're going through the different steps to get not only the technical and legal and tax pieces set up, but also the cultural pieces set up so that you're going to succeed.
And that means integrating with other experts and professionals as well,
Yeah,
right? So,
yeah,
on the very surface, it's coordinating calendars. It can be a
yeah,
challenge
yeah,
in and of
yeah,
itself, let
yeah.
alone.
So it's a yeah, because we are we're the project manager. We're making sure that your project is staying on track,
Mhm.
and we're liaising with the tax advisor, and we're liaising with the lawyer, and we're making sure we have the right information from the evaluator, and
Mhm.
we're putting all that together in the way that is needed for your particular transition.
Okay, great. So we're talking about this from the perspective of the business owner, right? But then there's the employees. At what stage or how do we deal with the communication here?
Yeah,
In this potential transition. Let's
yeah,
share a little bit about that.
yeah. It's so the from the very earliest moments, we involve employees as much as the owners want us to involve them, right? So as long as there's an openness, sometimes when we're doing a suitability, the owners will be like, "No, I'm not ready for you. I don't want to raise this with the employees." Oftentimes, though, we'll encourage them to allow us to get their insights from the perspective of we're just exploring. We're not guaranteeing anything. This is just an exploration. But the education and communication is a big part of what we do, and we build that in all along. And then of course, as we're getting closer to launch, it ramps up and there's a lot more communication. And we can either provide those communication supports ourselves, or if you have an internal communications team, we'll work with your comms department to make sure that we're rolling that out on a good timeline.
Right.
Basically, by the time we get to launching, I want everyone super bored at the presentation because I want everyone knowing
Yeah, 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 yeah.
all the information already, right? Like there shouldn't be any surprises by the time we get
Right.
to, yeah,
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Um, so that gives us like a high level overview of what you know what services you provide and sort of the why you might want to consider it from the perspective of employees and legacy and culture. Um, what would be like, what's the very, very first step? Um, or, top recommendation. Maybe this could even play into the fun, frank advice piece that I like to wrap up each of my shows with. But um, at the beginning, the beginning of the journey, um, what's the
Yeah, so
core
I I
core here
think
to think about?
for me, the beginning of the journey is to really to reach out and have a conversation. I think all too often as business owners, I mean, there's always too many things to do. You're always kind of running behind. This week with all the snow, I've been, imagining the
Mm.
giant snowball rolling downhill, right? Kind of running to stay ahead of it. And so, and so if you haven't thought about succession planning, if you don't know how you're going to transition your business, and even if that transition is 10 plus years away, the seeds that you sow right now are what will bear fruit in 5, 10 years. So if your horizon is less than 10 years, you should absolutely be having conversations and getting this set up. But even if your horizon is longer, like have the conversations with people, talk to someone like us, talk to an M&A advisor, like just get the information about what your options are for succession. Because I think if you design your company in a way that you know how you're going to exit, then you'll be more intentional now and that will be more fruitful for you down the road.
So listen to the Cash Rich Exit podcast because Colleen brings on all kinds of all kinds of experts and other business owners who are at different stages of their business. It's a great resource.
It's a fantastic resource. I highly recommend it.
Sorry, it just I had to. That's awesome. So I'm gonna say let's wrap up segment one of three as we dive into this concept and try to make it a living, breathing option for more business owners as you're thinking about your intentional exit.
Yeah.
So join us again next week for some more.